Hello everybody. For my paper, I decided to focus in on chivalric revival in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So when I first started looking into Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and what I might want to talk about, I started with the pentangle and what was the significance of it, and then also like what was the knightly code. But I ended up focusing more in on chivalry and how it shapes our understanding of the story. Central to this idea of chivalry in this story is the background or the social climate of the time when Sir Gawain and the Green Knight was written. So the 14th century brought a decline to the chivalric ideals that had been the religious, moral, and social code of the previous generations. The medieval feudalistic society filled with knights and nobility that once characterized Europe was now falling. The merchant middle class, on the other hand, was rising. These drastic social and economic changes created a new order of things that not everyone was really happy about. The 13th century Arthurian romances that shaped the writers of the 13th century were no longer descriptive of the European climate. Chivalry was kind of dead. Although the author is unknown, it can be inferenced that he longed for the return of chivalry that used to be present in medieval Europe. This sort of background knowledge led me to my thesis. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight mocks the 14th century ideals and pleads with the readers to revive chivalry by presenting a hero who, while was not perfect, showed his virtue in holding up the chivalric code. This idea is important because the poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is traditionally just viewed as an epic-style poem that celebrates an Arthurian culture. While it does do that, if proven, this would change the perspective of readers on the different characters and the overall themes and events that happen in the story. So how does the poet mock 14th century Europe? Well, as we know, this poem is set in the court of Arthur, and according to all 13th century literature, the court of Arthur was supposed to be the most powerful, feared court, filled with legendary knights renowned for their bravery and honor. Well, in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, they open at this giant celebration for Christmas at Arthur's court, and pretty much right at the beginning of the poem, the poet presents his first mockery of the 14th century people. As we briefly talked about in class when discussing this epic, chivalry could not really be carried out to its full extent any longer because the society had gone through those changes where they weren't under any circumstances to really be chivalrous, to go on knightly quests or anything of the sort, where they would really need to use their virtue. So, the poet is saying that now in the 14th century, the only way to demonstrate that chivalry is through a game. So right at the beginning of the poem, the poet says, "His pledge to take no portion from his plate on such a special day until a story was told. Some far-fetched yarn or outrageous fable, the tallest of tales, yet one ringing with truth, like the action-packed epics of men-at-arms, or till some chancer had challenged his chosen knight, dared him with a lance to lay life on the line." This passage clearly relates to this idea that there were no real circumstances of chivalry anymore. As we know, the Green Knight shows up in the court, and the Green Knight presents a challenge, a game to this court of people who were supposed to be the best, the most powerful. And yet, when this challenge is presented, not a single person steps up to the challenge. That situation perfectly identifies that decline of the chivalric ideals in the 14th century because this prestigious court was actually just a group of cowardly people, which represents the change from all the knightly quests and the bravery and virtue to now this group of people who don't really seem to care. Moving forward through the plot of the epic, we are introduced to our hero, Sir Gawain. So, even though he was the lowliest and least skilled member of the court, he is the one who ends up stepping up in the attempt to defend the name of the House of Arthur. Through this virtuous knight, all of the characteristics of the chivalric code are demonstrated for readers. And furthermore, they are also presented in the pentangle, which is a symbol on Sir Gawain's shield. These virtues are important to the poet's plea for chivalry because they are the very qualities that he would like to see return to the people of the 14th century. The pentangle is an interesting subject because it requires all of the virtues to be kept completely perfectly. As one of my scholarly sources, Beauregard, says, if the pentangle is understood to represent the perfection of the connected virtues, the question then becomes a matter of which virtues are dealt with in the poem. And as we look through the epic and we discuss the central themes and concepts, it appears that the two most important virtues that appear are fortitude and loyalty. So looking at fortitude, there are actually two different modes. The first is to attack an evil, and the second is to endure an evil. This obviously corresponds with the main events of the epic, where first Gawain stepped up to behead the Green Knight, initiating the challenge, and then in the end, he endured the evil by letting himself get beheaded. But here we see Gawain fault because he wasn't fully able to repress his fear when he was the one that was going to be beheaded, because we see him flinch. We see the second virtue, loyalty, at first when Sir Gawain steps up to the plate to accept the challenge and defend the court of Arthur. But then we also see he's very loyal with Lord Bertilac, who he didn't really know. But when Lord Bertilac presented his game, Sir Gawain was very honest with what he received through the game via the wife of Lord Bertilac, but at the same time he refused to let anything too drastic happen with the wife who was trying to test him and his loyalty. He did falter in his loyalty in the end when this lady offered him the girdle, which would ultimately save his life. So here he's presented with the choice between being loyal and being alive. Although Gawain showed great fortitude and great loyalty, in the end he still faltered in both virtues. However disappointing it may be that Sir Gawain was not able to retain the perfection of the pentangle, the circumstances actually present themselves a situation that readers could relate to. It's unusual that the hero presented by the poet was not perfect, or rather that the hero was not able to perfectly keep the chivalric code. But this is probably exactly what the poet intended. Readers can relate to this hero better than a hero that is absolutely perfect, because even when a reader or a regular human being tries with all their might to be perfect in every way, they always fault in one or more areas repeatedly. The poet plays on this human depravity by creating a hero who is just like the readers. This brings an overall theme that someone can achieve greatness without being perfect. This lends itself to the poet's purpose in reviving chivalry. By presenting a hero who is imperfect yet still beloved and honored, it gives readers a more realistic standard to reach for. The people no longer really cared about striving for that chivalrous virtue or qualities because of this, and the fact that there was no way that they could be perfect. Another of my scholarly resources, Harvey, states, the poet shows that the only society which can obtain some semblance of greatness and truth is that life, that society, which hearkens to the chivalric ideal. The poet basically says that if you don't hold yourself to these chivalrous ideals, that you could not be great or achieve greatness as a society or as an individual. Although the poet laments for those real knightly circumstances, he also recognizes that true chivalry cannot occur under this new order of things. Instead, he basically calls for a partial revival of chivalry, hoping that his imperfect hero would ignite a spark in his audience so that they would attempt to be virtuous without the pressure of being perfect. It's pretty clear to me that Sir Gawain and the Green Knight was written with the intention to revive chivalry, at least to some extent, and by creating a main character who was unable to be perfect in difficult situations, it causes the reader to really be able to relate to Gawain. And even though readers may agree familiarize themselves with the virtues they had begun to dismiss in the 14th century, it's unclear if the poet actually accomplished what he intended. Was it just an epic poem that they enjoyed reading? Or did the poet actually succeed in a revival of chivalry? Unfortunately, there's not enough to prove that the revival of chivalry did occur as a result of this epic, but it is clear that the poet attempted this through his social commentary on chivalry and perfection of virtue in the epic. I just want to leave you with a few discussion questions. Do you think the Gawain poet succeeded in his quest to revive chivalry? If you had been in this time period, would you have been encouraged by the idea of an imperfect hero? And then how does this outlook on the story change your perspective on the story? And then finally, if Sir Gawain is an imperfect hero that readers could relate to, what do we make of the Green Knight? What role does he play in this social commentary? Thank you for listening today.